I'm Jane Neapolitan, Assistant Provost, Office of Academic Innovation, and our office has been collaborating with the Albert S. Cook Library on providing information to faculty about open educational resources.
Thank you, Jane, and welcome everybody. I'm Debbie Nolan, Dean of University Libraries here at Towson, and we are pleased to be able to co-host this with the Office of Academic Innovation. Today is the second in our series of conversations about open educational resources, and we're delighted because we have faculty members from Towson University here today who are going to share their experiences, maybe some tips and tricks, lessons learned about using or creating open educational resources. So welcome and enjoy.
Thank you. So I guess, I don't know, Jane, if you want to start it off, but we have our two faculty members. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
I'm Patty Doran. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Special Education and in the College of Ed. I've been here, this is my 5th year.
Hi, I'm Liz Angeli. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of English, and I also teach in our master's professional writing program over in CLA. And I'm healing an old injury, which is why I'm in a sling. Usually people, that's their first question they have for me, so there it is.
So I think we intended this as a sort of an open conversation. So I guess we can talk, and I don't know if there are any other faculty members here who also have any experience using OERs in their teaching yet? Okay. Why don't we start, I guess, with maybe Patty, you can tell us what your experience has been so far with OERs?
Sure, absolutely. So I implemented OERs last fall in a course I teach that's required for our special education majors. I teach primarily either special ed majors or majors in our double cert special ed elementary ed program. And so these were our elementary ed special ed students. And it was a course where I had been sort of gradually moving toward using a lot of tech-based or online resources anyway. It was a course where our students take 17 credit hours a semester, so I figured students in that particular program might enjoy something that was a little bit of a break from your typical buy the textbook, read the textbook, memorize the textbook. And so, it was a really interesting semester. I feel like I learned a lot. I certainly feel I'm planning to implement OER again in that class next fall. So I would say it was successful, but I'm certainly planning to do a lot of things differently. It was one thing where, you have that moment with certain classes where you go to open up that file with your course evals and you sort of brace yourself for cringe. And I wasn't quite sure because I really felt like not having that security of, read the textbook, respond to the textbook, write about the textbook, answer the questions on page 47. I really didn't have a sense all the time of how the semester had gone. And my student feedback was a lot more positive than I expected. I think they really appreciated being college students. They really appreciated not having to buy the textbook. And I felt like for me in thinking about whether to adopt or whether to re-adopt, I felt like that was almost sort of an ethical plus for me. I feel like our students, many of them and many of our students are paying their own way or supplementing or contributing. And so I really appreciated. It seemed like they saw that as a real positive. It was $120 less that they had to come up with out of their pocket. For a college student, that's 10 hours less that you have to work waiting tables or whatever. So that was, I think, a plus. Certainly wouldn't be the only factor in my decision, but it was a nice plus. I think they appreciated it from a budget perspective. I think they appreciated the flexibility and that accessibility. With textbooks, we're getting to that point where they're also available electronically, and you can buy your little, Pearson Access card and take your textbook anywhere or have it on your iPad. But I think they appreciated the flexibility of that open educational thing. A lot of those things were tech-based or online resources that I was utilizing, so I think that was a helpful thing for them as well. So I don't know, there are certainly things I would change, but I don't know if maybe that's something where you want to share first, or if people have questions. I don't know
I have a
how long
question.
you want me to talk.
What prompted your decision to go open on that particular class?
So on that particular class, it's a class where we teach students how to write lesson plans and special education documents, individualized education plans. Part of it was that I never really found a textbook in that class that was really a good fit. So it wasn't something, we have those classes where you have your book and you love your book and you're set. I never really found that with that class, and I'd moved toward using a lot of stuff that was open or publicly available anyway. So for me, part of it was about the fit. Ironically enough, halfway into the semester, I had a colleague come up to me who found what probably would have been the perfect book for the class. And so I've sort of struggled with whether to go back or not, but I feel like we're on this path. What I have is still good for my students. The one thing for me, and I don't know if you found this with your open ed resources, I think I shared a little bit with you about this. For me, I felt like one thing that I struggled with was that accountability piece. With a textbook, it's really easy. You have your accountability built in. Either you can have your students bring the book to class or answer the quiz questions or do the online quiz associated with the textbook. And doing OER this time around, I feel like I've been through it. I know how my students are using the resources I've created and put there. So it's a little bit easy for me to think about purposeful ways to assess that they're doing the reading, whether that be through online quizzes or response papers. Last semester, I think I was just so focused on getting the resources up there and having them available. I didn't really think about that accountability piece of how am I going to still make sure you're reading them. And I think if my students slipped anywhere, it was probably, I'm guessing some of them probably took advantage of that sort of piece of my planning and probably didn't read as carefully or didn't get to the pieces that I wanted them to get all the time.
Did you use it this semester too?
I didn't, because I don't teach that class this semester, so I have a different class.
So this was spring
It was
15.
fall 15. That's right. Feels like a year ago, but it's how the academic calendar always goes for us.
So, one of the things that they talked about is how you have to ensure the stability of the site.
Yes.
And where you talked about you used sources that you yourself had used
Yeah.
in practice. Did anything go away, or were you able
Yeah.
to, so you had to supplement them and stay on top of the fact that the source was there the week
Yes.
you were asking them to read it,
Yes.
at least?
Yes, and one thing for me that I think worked well for me because it's field specific and wouldn't translate as well to other classes, but for me, given what the topic was in special education, I found myself where a couple of years ago I would have, thrown up, oh, here's a great example from an IEP plan from some random district in Wisconsin. And I found now, as a result of that issue, I found myself much less likely to go to that random IEP online that I know is great, but that district in Wisconsin at some point will stop maintaining that hyperlink. And I found myself relying a little bit more on federal resources from clearinghouses or think tanks, things that were a little bit less likely, just so that hopefully between September when I put it out and December when you take your final, it's still there. So I found for me that quality piece was also something I hadn't had to think about before because I wasn't so dependent on those resources.
So do you have any other criteria that you sort of have as a rule of thumb in addition to the stability? What other criteria did you use?
So for us, and again, it was probably more course specific for me. The course in which I highlighted it was one, first of all, that I taught 3 or 4 times already. And so I feel like probably some of that criteria for me at this point was almost implicit or unspoken. Like I sort of know it when I see it, if it's going to work or not. And I think some of it was that's a course where we prepare students for 2 of their signature assessments that are benchmarks in our program that they have to pass to graduate. So a big part of what I was looking for in the first half of the course, I looked for things that would give students sort of the conceptual or theoretical background to understand the concepts. We did a lot more research briefs, journal articles, and then in the second half of the class, it was much more, is this something that's specific enough to give you the skills to do this benchmark assignment? And again, that I think is really course specific. But I guess in a sense it was just sort of when it was aligned to the purpose. The course sort of had an arc to it in terms of going from big picture concepts to accomplishing very specific skills by the end.
I think just from a logistical point of view, so it sounds like were you using Blackboard? And so these were links that you were posting on Blackboard.
Correct. And some PDFs that I would post on. And I don't know if it's okay to say this or not, or how you all feel. Blackboard is probably not, if I were going to dream up a platform to share documents with students, it probably wouldn't look exactly like Blackboard. But I feel like for students, I felt like, first of all, I was yanking the rug out from under them in terms of, you don't have a book, you don't have chapter review questions to summer. So I didn't feel like it was really the time to, oh, by the way, I'm going to put all these, documents you need on whatever, my personal website. So it was, largely, almost entirely, I think, done through Blackboard. And just really, and I just sort of organized week by week. Here's your links for this.
And I would want to stress that whenever you're using content that is either in the public domain or that is posted under a type of license, like a Creative Commons license that says that you can reuse this, then you might as well go ahead and download it and repost it, because then you don't have to worry about broken links.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, but when you're linking to content that is protected by copyright, is not open content, then you do pretty much need to rely on those links, unless you can use fair use to justify using a portion of the materials.
That's a really good
So, yeah. Did any of your students, from what I've read, it sounds like a lot of students still prefer, even though they are all online all the time and they are very used to that, they're digital natives, they still prefer hard copy for their course reading materials. Did any of your students tell you that, or did they print out the materials?
A lot of students printing things out. That was one indication for me when I got the sense, when things get busy and hectic at the middle of the semester, when I got the sense that they maybe were skipping a little on the reading. A big part of the indication was I looked at those kids who had printed everything out the first couple of weeks, and they're showing up with their laptop, and I'm thinking they probably haven't gone through that degree part. Or their learning styles really changed in the last 2 years. Odds are. So yeah, I still had students who did that. I don't know if you have you done the same. I have some kids, almost all my students had laptops, and I think that was a huge difference. And in terms of thinking about that financial burden piece on students, because truthfully, if you're going to use OER and you have a student who doesn't have the access to that technology, either my department has technology that I'm giving them during class so they can access it, or they're sort of going in the lab and spending 8 cents a page to print it out. So I felt like for my students, it was because they had they all had laptops, and that was a huge help.
Well, we have representatives here from the bookstore, from the campus bookstore, so I'm wondering if, do you think it's possible, or maybe I should pose it to the two of you, to create this as a on-demand course packet? So that's a possibility. Probably cheaper than 8 cents a page in the lab.
I think that is something that we already do for some courses.
That's a really great, and that's sort of, I think, gets to that UDL piece of whatever it is, just as an option.
So maybe Liz, if you want to sort of give the basics of what you've done with OERs, and then we can open the floor up further.
I should have said in my introduction, I've actually been on both sides of OER. I teach with them, and I think I've been teaching with them longer than I think they've been called open educational resources, which is just kind of just realized as you were talking. But I've also created OERs. I did my PhD at Purdue, and I ran the Purdue Online Writing Lab for 2 years. So I was not all of it. But a lot of things like the APA and MLA sample papers actually are papers that I wrote for class and then annotated for the OWL. But so I was in the discussions about how are our users going to be using this information, how do we present it so that people who still have dial-up in some countries can download this information, print it, and still have it be readable and useful for their students. So I haven't, since I'm now in my 4th year here, I haven't developed any OER materials since coming to Towson. But here at Towson, and I think even before I came here, I teach courses in technical writing, business writing, rhetoric and science, and writing for the web. And I do that at the undergraduate and the graduate levels. And back when I started teaching professional writing courses, the field within English is still pretty new. So good comprehensive textbooks are just starting to really roll out and pick up. So I really always had to supplement, and I mean I would supplement with the OWL because that's what was there at Purdue and I knew it like the back of my hand. I still supplement with it, but like you were saying, sometimes the stability is an issue. Like just today, my students read the readability principles that were up. One student emailed me last night and said, this presentation isn't working. So then I had to then become tech support, which I think is one of the challenges of OERs, and you suddenly have to make sure you know what browsers your students are using, what platforms they're using it from. Internet Explorer doesn't work with anything anymore. Safari is sometimes really tricky. So that's one of the challenges that I've come up with. But the other thing that I really like about using OER, especially with my graduate students is I ask them to create assignments and readings and bring things into class. And so I've sort of modeled for them, the Huffington Post has a lot of great stuff. YouTube has a lot of great stuff. When I teach technology, I use YouTube a lot because I don't teach one specific program. I teach the students the skills how to teach themselves how to use programs because, like, for example, Photoshop is going to change next year, and I don't want to just teach my students one version. So I've used it for OERs for a few different purposes, but I did notice when I rely more heavily on them, especially in a class like rhetoric and science, which is heavy with the theory, and so we read a lot of popular news articles to start applying what the theory says. Reading comprehension went down, and I started assigning at the end of every. So I have weekly schedules up for all my classes, and I have readings listed in hyperlink to, and then below it, I ask the students to respond in writing to 3 questions about the readings that I have prepared that I want them to answer. And so that's a lot more work for me because I have to reread through these things and then think about how they all connect and then what I want the students to get out of them. And then think about, okay, well, how am I going to look at what they're bringing to class and how they're synthesizing things. So it helped a lot. I have not had my students here at Towson read so well as when I did that. It was heavy stuff. I mean, we're reading Thomas Kuhn and Nietzsche and big heavy hitters, and they were doing fantastic work. But it was a lot more work than I had anticipated.
So it sounds like you're doing the sort of what you would get in an off-the-shelf textbook of the sort of chapter assessment questions, or what did you read, what did you learn? You have to sort of create that yourself because you're using content that you found.
Yeah, which, I mean, then the nice thing is it really does allow you to personalize things quite a bit, which I don't know, I really like. Even sometimes with off-the-shelf quizzes about things, especially with business communication, I look at some of the quizzes and go, this isn't what I want my students to get out of this. Why am I having that? And business communication books are over $200. So it's just, they're not all that great, at least from a rhetorical perspective, which is the perspective I teach from. The other good thing, you're talking about Creative Commons before, by using things that are in the public domain and even licensed under Creative Commons, that's a great way to teach the students about Creative Commons. And I'm teaching writing for the web this semester, and my students are now licensing their stuff that they write with Creative Commons. Like, they've learned how to do that, they know what it means. I have students posting like artwork that they created that they want to showcase that they were worried people were going to steal, and I said, no, let's talk about Creative Commons. You can generate your own license to put on. So that was a really neat thing to see them start applying and take away. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I think it does help lead to a more nuanced understanding of the ways that copyright can be, how we can work within the existing copyright system to, for those of us who want to share content with others, a way to do that, make it clear to others that they can use your content.
That's a nice skill for sort of the digital world, because that's a great example of something they're going to face outside of Towson in their careers, etc. It's a nice way to staff it for real world skills.
Yeah.
And it's also great to hear that because I've had, in my role as the DMCA agent for Towson University, I've gotten takedown notices for, there was one site in particular, a travel website, and students in the same computer science class had an assignment to create their first website. And they were all going to the same travel website and downloading photos, and sure enough, they'd find out and they'd send us takedown notices. So then I had to, and the students normally, by the time that we got the takedown notice, the students had already been graded and they didn't care anymore, so they were fine with taking it down. But that raises that whole thorny issue of, well, maybe they have a fair use claim to make here, and should we take it down, as opposed to the obvious, peer-to-peer file sharing, obvious infringement things, something where you're actually using someone else's content without their permission, but for an educational purpose, and you're using limited quantities, maybe it could qualify as fair use. So it's a way to, even though I don't want to discourage anyone from exercising their fair use rights, it's a way to bypass that all that hassle. More, now that there is all this content available out there that's freely licensed for reuse, it's great to hear that somebody who's teaching here at Towson, writing for the web, is steering students towards those resources.
Yeah, because all my students have to write news summaries, and normally news summaries come pictures. And I was grading their drafts of their websites, and a lot of them just right-clicked on pictures from CNN and put it in, and I told them, I said, right now you have the luxury of being protected by being a student. Half you are graduating in 2 months. Your website's not going anywhere. Someone Googles your name when you're on the job market and your picture comes up and you have all these right-clicked pictures from CNN, that is going to damage your credibility as a writer. And so we're using WordPress, and we've been working with Student Computing Services and OTS, and they taught the students how to put in these plugins. One's called CompFight, which allows them to search Flickr and all these Creative Commons things, and they're often disappointed with the results because they're not as good, obviously, as like PBS pictures or something like that. But it really gets them thinking about, well, how can I visually represent this information in other ways? And so it's just neat to see sort of the writing process morph in ways that I don't even think they expected.
So Liz, do you have an idea of how much money students saved, even if it's in one course? Do you have a sense of the dollar amount?
For my own students?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, I don't know. I know the book I had them buy this semester, I think was $70, and it was a lot. It was smaller than the other business communication textbooks that are full of stuff they're not going to need. But I really don't know, because I always have assigned usually one textbook and then have supplemented. But the most expensive book I've had the students buy, I think, was $210, and it was a mistake. It was just, even after I 3 weeks into the course, I went, God, I thought this book was going to be better than it was. Some students like the book. And the other thing with buying books too, I always tell the students that I take time to have books that are going to offer resources for them for a lifetime. And I mean, stuff's changed, even MLA and EPA change, but the foundations of clear communication don't. And so frequently, like with the technical communication textbook I use, most of them don't return it because they find it to be so useful, and they haven't been bombarded with having to buy 2 other textbooks, or like having to buy the APA manual. Sorry, APA, for taking money from you, but it's on the OWL. Why not just?
Right. I used it.
Yeah, and so did I. It was a long time ago, before I got there.
That makes sense. As you're keeping those textbook costs down, you give students more freedom to consider that buying option rather than renting. I think so many of our students, when they're confronted with that $210 textbook, they rent it because 60 is a lot better than 210, and I'll take a chance that my roommate won't spill coffee on it because then I can. And I think you're right, it gives students that flexibility to not feel as bad about, or feel like they can not have that same pinch.
And making sure the books, like you said before, the various formats, like the ebooks and the Kindles that they can buy, I mean, it's so much cheaper sometimes. But it just is a good alternative.
Patty, you mentioned that once you started teaching the class, you found that there was a course a textbook that possibly could have served. Do you know what that one cost?
It was actually pretty cheap, and so I've been really going back and forth about adding it as a supplemental. Last semester when I did OER, I had a book as an optional book, and I said to the class, there's one specific project where this book will really help you, but you can do it without. I did not use it in class because I felt like using an optional book in class is kind of making it mandatory. This one, I'm really going back and forth. It's not super expensive. It's like one of those, in teaching, there's a lot of kind of trade books that are marketed toward practicing teachers, so it's one of those kind of $30 or $40 books. And that one is pretty reasonable. But again, I think it's just that debate. They can probably get all the information elsewhere. I can find all the information elsewhere. It's just whether they're going to learn better having it organized in a book, where it's pre-organized for them in chapters, and is that better than the organization I can do with this, and this on Blackboard? And I'm not sure, like I said, I thought I would get a lot more pushback from students in course evaluations. I thought I'd get a lot more, these materials were all over the place, I didn't really know, I wasn't quiet, I want my textbook, and I didn't get any of that, honestly. So I'm not quite sure what we'll do next semester. I think one thing that has been interesting thinking about OER, and as you were talking about multimedia resources, I think it's probably made me, and will continue to make me, more careful about accessibility. We've had several students in the past year or two who have needed information in multiple formats, whether it's making sure that video has captions or something else. And so I found even several of the resources that I used last fall using OER, I'm looking back at thinking about the students I have this semester and realizing that won't work at all for this particular student. And I think where that's it, where we don't have, oh, well, there's the textbook and that's most of the information and here's a nice enrichment link, I'm realizing I have to be a lot more purposeful about making sure everything that I put online as a resource is accessible to all my learners. And there's a ton of videos out there that are not, I think there's this perception that YouTube, YouTube will put up the captions, which are atrocious.
Yeah.
So,
There's an additional tip. Something that we hear as complaints frequently is that the closed captioning will be outdated past an update to the video itself. So it's good to actually, as you're previewing the content,
yeah,
turn on that closed captioning and make sure that it's accurate throughout the video
yeah,
to the content that's being spoken.
yeah, that's great.
I've been getting emails, maybe Matt, you've probably been getting these too, but from captioning services now, they seem to be sort of capitalizing on the recent lawsuits that have been filed against schools to sort of push to get schools to buy into using their services. And I don't know if those services have a proven track record or if it's even something we might be looking at in the future here at Towson, but it is an issue. So I'm curious, you mentioned that you had the business communication textbook that cost over $200 and you realized it was a mistake. Because one of the things I'd read before giving my presentation in the first session we had was that frequently one of the things that teachers find is that instructors will find that they, in order to justify the high cost of a textbook, they end up sort of slightly shifting their focus and teaching towards the textbook rather than teaching towards the course learning outcomes. Did you find that was a temptation to sort of like, oh, I wasn't going to teach this, but it's in the book, so I better.
No.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
It was always one of those like, all right, well, the book stops talking about this topic that you really need to learn on page 67. So go to this website and it talks about it more in depth, or it talks about it in a better way that's not, is a lot of the books in BizCom are text heavy, which is not how you should, it's just sort of, they're starting to get better, but yeah, I didn't have that temptation.
Good.
Okay, that's good. I was like, oh my
Sounds good to
God.
me. And I think, Lori, or Patty, you mentioned those types of the multimedia content that you get with commercial textbooks.
Right.
Had you had experience using those as well?
No, it's interesting you ask because I'm using an electronic textbook from a new commercial or a new publisher that I hadn't used before, and I'm using that in one of my other classes this spring. And it's been really interesting for me thinking about that as a contrast with OER, because I feel like on the one hand, I bent over backwards to sort of make sure my students had this open experience where they weren't paying for a textbook. And here I'm saying, okay, you have to buy this $120 textbook with it. And really it's for my convenience because the quiz questions are already embedded in there and everything's online. And I have not been, I think in terms of making it really convenient and easy for me, I've been very happy, but I have not been as impressed with a commercial service. I had a couple of students who needed some different formats presented. We had to spend an awful lot of time with DSS trying to figure out how to retrofit that material because it wasn't presented in an accessible way. Same thing as you, where the materials just weren't necessarily that great. They were super convenient, but the content wasn't what I would have created. And for this class, it's okay because it's an intro survey class. We're really getting the students to read the textbook is a huge part of the class because it's a survey class, it's not real in-depth. But it really has been a really interesting contrast for me because I'm thinking about what works with that experience in terms of the multimedia, everything being right there at the students' fingertips, having a lot of different built-in ways to assess student learning. And I'm sort of trying to think about, okay, well, how can I take that and put it into an OER kind of format? Because I think that would be the best of all worlds for our students, right? If we could give them all that convenience and bells and whistles of the textbook in an open format. At least for my students and for the class where I used OER. So it's been a really interesting contrast, I guess.
I know that one of the things that they stress so there's content that you can find out there that's on the web that's public domain or licensed, but with quote unquote open educational resources, typically they have the 5 R permissions, and one of those R's is revise. You can actually build upon it. You're free to create your own derivative work based on that work. Is that something you could realistically see working with the materials that you've used if they didn't quite address topic the way you'd hope they would, excuse me, could you see having the time to do that, or is that too much to ask of a particular instructor to sort of go in and tinker with and re-engineer the content in a way and add to it? Or would you not feel comfortable doing that?
That is,
Yeah.
I think I do that when I teach, but I don't
Yeah.
write it down.
Yeah.
You know what?
Right.
That makes sense. Or I wouldn't do it in any formal way. Like the reading questions might be one way that I would do that. But that sounds like a summer project, which is okay. But yeah, that would. I just haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
You have.
I hadn't thought about it in terms of that connection. I think that is really, and I think a lot of what I would do, same thing would be more informal with a class, but I can see a value to doing that. Again, for me, where I struggle is just with having a good way to assess student reading, so that before they come into class, I have a clear handle on, have they read this? Do they understand it? Are they making meaning out of it? Is it the meaning I want them to get out of it? And I can really see a benefit to revision there. Time-wise, I don't know. And I think with assessing student learning, it's sort of like that distinction between qualitative and quantitative research and assess. Qualitative's a lot easier to set up, but then you spend a lot more time reading your data. Like, it's a lot quicker for me to say, okay, write me, an open response paragraph on what you got out of the reading, but then I'm reading 25 paragraphs versus creating a multiple choice quiz or something. But I could see some benefit to doing that as part of that revision process. Maybe that would be less tinkering with the content and more tinkering with the assessment methods. But that's a really interesting possibility.
Did you all, so there are open educational resource repositories where you can go and find content. Were you tempted to go to that extent, or was it really more a matter of you kind of know what are good readings and the topics, and you kind of go find where those exist, rather than, like the repositories will often include a full textbook, rather than putting together different readings of a full textbook or even a course module or some kind of multimedia presentation. Have either of you had the chance to look into those types of resources yet?
I haven't used the repositories, as you were just saying, that I have used for my writing for the web class. I've used, I think it's called W3 Schools, that have online tutorials for students to learn, I think it's W3 Schools, to learn HTML, Java, CSS, a bunch of other things, which has helped because I'm not recreating lectures. Okay, here's what HTML is, here are the tags, here's how it works. But I have not yet investigated the repositories. I wrote that down.
And I think in some of the early discussions last year with some of the other folks involved in the USM pilot of OER, there was some discussion and some of those resources were shared. And I looked a little bit at them then and did not really find much in those repositories that spoke to the content of this specific class. And again, I think it's because it's a class that's built toward teacher licensure in a specific state with a very specific set of objectives. So I think that might have been more a function of disciplinarity for me rather than that. But there are also a lot of materials out on the web that are not necessarily built as OER course kind of materials, but that are really great repositories for course content, where I was able to go and post them.
I did. I was curious to ask some of my librarian colleagues at the table when you mentioned the OWL site as a resource. Was it the hacker site that was changed? That was no. Okay, Sean is nodding. So you, even those great resources, you have no guarantee they're going to remain available.
There was obviously, so this is, it was a writing guide, and it had a lot of examples for citation styles, which you know up. And so it was available. It's still available as a conventional book. But they had this website. I don't even know why they had a free website that duplicated a lot of the information. We were just lucky to have it access to it as long as we did. And lots of librarians were very dependent on using that and showing it to students.
And now it's a subscription-based resource.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear on whether it's available electronically. Maybe I don't think it's really available to libraries because they realize
Just to individuals.
how that would go. But yeah, it's all the motivation in why someone's putting something up, and disappear.
Yeah.
So things can be free for different reasons, and things can disappear for different reasons.
Is it the Hacker, Dan Hacker manual?
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah.
yeah, I wonder if
That's it. Yeah.
publishers got involved. Because that's always a,
I mean,
yeah.
it was from the publisher.
Oh, so
side.
is that- okay, so it wasn't
they
like
were
Diane
offering
Hacker
it as a
putting it up.
freebie, which
That
I
is
always
weird.
They
did
just
wonder,
changed
like,
it.
that's
Yeah, that just
weird.
that seems weird, yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't probably all the content of the book, but it was the part that
But, yeah, yeah.
I don't know that it's been going on long enough to speak to this yet. And maybe students don't rely on foundational textbooks later in their course of study, but this notion that you would keep something because you had a physical thing that was meaningful relative to your learning that you're going to hang on to refer back to for whatever reason. And being able to get into the Blackboard site again, or I suppose they have the option of copying the link or
Right,
downloading the PDF themselves and retaining. So the responsibility is on them. If they find content they want, then they need to save it. And I guess then
That's a good point. And I think with the sort of ephemeral nature of links, there is something where you could have a repository of great documents or materials, and yeah, unless it's provided to you as a PDF and you've gone and saved it as a PDF and printed it out, even if you keep the link to the PDF and it's on Blackboard, yeah, you lose your Blackboard access. I think that's a good one.
so I don't know whether relative to feedback that's going to come up in the future in terms of students.
Well, that's another justification for having the bookstore. Put that on your shelf. And you could you've got a espresso book machine down there now, so they can actually find it like a book.
Yeah, I've been surprised though, and I don't know if it's just a function of students, when the economy is sort of limping along, or students not having a lot of money. I've been so surprised by how few of my students keep their books ongoing. And at the beginning of classes, sometimes in a class I'll have 2 or 3 books and I'll actually say, this one you could rent, this one you should really keep because you'll need it again during internship. But they're still all renting it. And I'm guessing, that's not because they don't care about the content because they're involved in the major, but it's a financial decision. And I don't know if you all are seeing that with more students using that rental option, or how
The
students
rental,
feel
of
about
course,
that.
is increasing around
Yeah.
because, of course, the price difference.
Yeah.
What I'm noticing is at the end of the semester, depending on how much they felt like they got from the book, sometimes they pay out the outright to end up keeping it at the end of the semester.
Oh, I didn't
So
know
I
they
do
do
see
that.
that a lot.
Oh,
And
wow.
from us, they can, not at a lot of the
sure,
places, I mean, from
yeah.
us, they can. I have seen that happen a lot. We get a lot of students at the end of the semester when they come to buy that, come in and actually buy out the book at the end of the semester. It's just
I want to buy this one.
yeah, they found out that they need a book for more than one course or whatever,
Yeah.
so they'll go ahead and pay off the difference, so they won't even have to pay for it again. We see that a lot, with the students, especially during 5/8 time.
Any subject patterns to that?
What I'm noticing more so is anatomy and physiology. Some math. A lot of students are actually end up buying the Hacker or the MLA.
We tell them to buy.
A lot of them do. I was going to say, even as old as mine is, I still use that. And depending on their major, I do see a lot of the education majors who get the assessment book, the
Yeah,
Word
that one
the
I
Word
can see.
and book, and the trying to think what was the other major book, the business writing all read book.
Oh,
This is Spiral all read. That one's the like 60. That one they keep. But I know which one you're talking about. The price drastically jumped for the new edition of the book that you just talked about, was 200.
Yeah.
It went from 96 to 210.
Oh
So
my
I
gosh.
understand.
Wow.
yeah,
I understand. It now has an access code with it.
So that was the justification.
So that's where a big jump happened with that book. So when you have a jump from a student who told them they bought a book and for 96 compared to now the book is 200, of course I'm going to run.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's a shock.
But maybe that also explains the jump that we're seeing in, those rented books versus if more students are maybe just availing themselves of that option to rent and like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Patty, you mentioned the MOST initiative, the Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative. So were you one of the people, did you go to an information session for that, or what was your experience?
It was. I had a really good experience with that initiative. I feel like it was a little bit more front-loaded. They spent a lot more time at the beginning with some initial chats and getting to know kind of discussions, which was really helpful. And they were available throughout. I think they had, office hours you could connect with, and they had sort of these monthly chats and things. And as we got into the semester, probably all other things being equal, you know how it is during the semester. I didn't access those ongoing supports as much during the semester. But I think looking back, I can look back and see, this is where, now here's where I know I would need a little more support in evaluating, okay, is everything going well 2 or 3 weeks in, and so on. So I found it really helpful.
Were you interacting directly with the people at Lumen Learning, or was it with the people at the College Park office?
It's the Center for Academic Innovation.
Yeah.
From Chair Bishop's
I
office.
feel like it was both, but that's a really good question. I'm not sure.
I know they were working
I know
with
they were
Lumen.
working with Lumen, and at one point it was sort of like the folks there you had like your sort of Lumen person who was sort of, okay, hi, I'm your on-call person from Lumen, and let me. So I feel like there was some bridge building where they were both involved.
Yeah.
So did that lead to actually using any resources that they provided, or are those not?
Use any of the resources they provided. And again, it wasn't for a lack of them providing things, but I think it was because I went into it with this course in mind, saying, here's a course that would be really good for adapting. I knew what kind of resources I was looking for. And again, the resources there, I think that's the thing with OER, there's a ton out there, but there's not going to be something out there for every single specific course that you want to teach in the way. My challenge was kind of unique because I was looking for, a course that addressed cultural and language diversity and lesson planning and response to intervention and individualized education planning all in one course. So for me, it was sort of easier to stick with what I had and then branch out from there and think what else would be needed to supplement.
I guess that goes to that whole sustainability issue for OERs because, as you say, there's not always a perfect resource for your needs. So at a certain point, if it's not there, you've got to build it. And so what supports are there for faculty who want to create OERs and contribute them to the community? And that's where I think we can get, hopefully our institutions will come to see the benefits of that in terms of it going towards your tenure review and as well as providing financial time support to create those resources.
I think it would be interesting, and I don't know what courses or what background all of you are from, but I think it would be interesting, and it would be a much more challenging thing, really, at least for me, to think about creating OERs for some kind of survey course or foundational course. I don't teach in math, but I would imagine it would be much more challenging to come up with, an OER math textbook or an OER anatomy textbook. It's pretty easy because I'm in a specialized discipline and my students already have the base. I don't need to find a resource that gives them the base, but I think it's a lot harder. We're so used to, when you have disciplines where you have a lot of that core foundational survey type knowledge, we're so used to getting that in a textbook form. I would imagine that would be very labor intensive for a faculty member to build that kind of course from scratch. And I don't know if anyone here has done that.
Anyone here from math? No, but
I will say, with me just coming back from the KMX convention, I actually met with OpenStax while I was there to find out what they were doing, and their focus is mostly on foundational courses right now. So they do currently have the anatomy, physiology, the algebra and all, but that's their main focus, is making sure they do the foundation courses.
I think that's really crucial.
Matt, did you work with one of the math professors? Remember, we did have a conversation about OER maybe last year, and there were a couple of math professors. They use a product that's on a professional association website.
I do remember the conversation, but I don't remember following up with either of those.
Oh, somehow I thought they worked with you to make sure that students could access it, or maybe that it was
Yes,
was compatible with Blackboard.
Yes, and I'll check with Tricia to see if that was the case. But as far as digital accessibility, I didn't talk about that.
All right. Well, we did have a conversation. We've had a number of conversations, obviously, about online learning, online modules, and there were a couple of professors here from math who use a product that comes from their National Math Association. And it's open, right? So are you familiar with it? Or?
I remember the two professors that were
Yes,
here.
you were
and
here.
I saw-
Right,
And
exactly.
I know one of the professors' names, but the professor that was up here actually showing us and explaining
Yes.
everything,
Yeah.
his name.
Right. But so, I mean, it can be done in math, it's just that what they use is something that's already built.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the difficulty is whether or not it is compatible with some of the Towson systems and students. It's like, we've had faculty also pilot Coursera, intro to statistics, I forget which one, but, calculus, that's it. I knew it was something I didn't like. Intro to calculus, and it was really it wasn't so much about the course itself, but whether or not students could log in only once, and who was the support for it. Was it somebody from Stanford University? You know, that gets kind of complicated when you start using those kinds of things. But the nice thing is that they're already built, and you're not looking for different materials because it's there. So it's a little different approach.
But it's interesting that you say that, because I've had that experience, and not in this particular course, but Stanford actually in education has done a couple of sort of mini courses and modules that are aimed at practicing teachers, and there have been times when I've been all ready to integrate those into courses and pull back for that same kind of issue, like, okay, well, you know, you can't submit an assignment to this person at Stanford and submit it to me, and what if you submit it to one and not the other, and a lot of those logistical. But if the computer at Stanford grades it differently from how I grade it, you know. And so I think you're right, there's a lot of kind of bugs.
Just, it's a little bit off topic, but some of you know that the University of Maryland University College purchased a membership to edX, which is one of the top two MOOCs, comes from Harvard and MIT. And the idea is that through the Center for Academic Innovation at the system level, there will be different kinds of MOUs written for different types of partnering and use of the edX. And so it runs the gamut from using whole courses from edX, for example, maybe for general education or for developmental courses that you just import it and the local professor facilitates it. It's really taught by whoever is on the screen. Or you can run all the way to the high end, which I think is exciting, where Towson could actually build courses or build modules, and then have support, technical support, and instructional design support from edX. Because no one university in and of itself really has enough people to manage all of these different steps that we're talking about. You know, so it's difficult on a faculty member. Then there's the library that, if you came last time, you heard that UMUC is really hard pressed to get all of those courses because their goal is 100% to be open resources.
Or textbook free.
Or textbook free,
Yeah,
right.
whatever.
Right. I think that, textbook is what first came into
Yeah.
people's minds, but it's
Right.
a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So this could be something that would be a great boon to us in terms of kind of bringing to scale, using open materials and building new modules, or using existing high quality courses that could substitute for the way we're handling courses now. But then there is the threat, and the threat is about jobs. Frankly, I have to say that, and everyone in the system knows that, because there are people who have built their whole careers committed to teaching, for example, developmental or the large survey courses. What does it mean for them?
Yeah.
So they have to really balance, the issues of efficiency and effectiveness, and also the human capital that we have in the system.
So it sounds like both of you, it sounds like your experience kind of is in line with what I've read, a lot of faculty's experiences. So there are a lot of faculty, according to recent surveys, a lot of faculty aren't aware of open educational resources, or maybe they use them and don't know that they're called open educational resources. But once they learn about them, they are willing to give it a try. They think it seems like a good idea. What is your sense among your faculty colleagues here at Towson, either in your department or elsewhere, in terms of, is there an interest and a need and a desire to use these types of resources? And if so, what do you think are the hindrances or the challenges to getting them to adopt them?
I think just in the field of professional writing and rhetoric, I think a lot of people are open to it because a lot of us do online teaching, not online teaching, but a lot of our research spaces are online and interesting, technical writing practices and things like that. Because I am in the English department, books are sort of still the thing, and it is. I mean, it's sort of hard to OER, James Joyce or things like that. And I think that some things exist. Like I think you can find Aristotle's On Rhetoric online, so you don't need to buy the whole book. And I think Plato's on stuff like that. But when I talked to the department last year after the Lumen meeting and everything, and talking about getting prices down, people were really panicked because those Norton anthologies that they assign are expensive and they're easy. Yeah, I mean, in terms of it's just, and I still have mine too. And it's so there was resistance, but we started talking about what alternatives are out there, and maybe it just takes some getting to know the library a little better, thinking about the options that are at the bookstore. But we have started the conversation. But I'm thinking about disciplines. I wonder how discipline specific it is and how easy it is to go OER, because and I think a lot of it too, technology can be really scary for some people in general, and faculty or people do. So just trying to lessen the sort of threshold of anxiety threshold of it will be okay. You will be able to find it. Your students will be able to access it. You might have to learn how to use Blackboard in a different way, but it'll be easier. So I think there are a lot of components that go into it.
It does seem like it has varied across departments, just from what anecdotal information I've been able to get. I think I know of at least, Thomas couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but I think there are at least a couple of faculty members in the music department I know who either use open resources or they use something other than Blackboard because they prefer to teach that way. So and I think you're right, it probably does depend a lot on what they're teaching. And even with English, you can find a public domain text out there, but does it have the notes that you want? Does it have from the Norton End has those great introductions?
Yep, and the translations.
Right.
I mean, that's the other thing. It's sort of,
is it a reliable text?
Exactly.
Right.
That was actually with the Lumen meeting last year. That was my question to them: is how do I know these authors are credible? Because I know that when I see, someone's name attached to the translation of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, I know, okay, I can assign that. I'm comfortable with my students buying that. But if nobody I've heard of, I don't know, this is going to be more work for me, and so there's a lot that goes into it.
I think increasingly with our textbooks too, that's an issue because our students are often relying as much on the online supplementary content, the videos, the study guide, the quizzes, the flashcards that all come with the textbook that come with those access codes. At least in I think our more practical oriented disciplines, and those too. The textbook might have that expert's name on the cover, but you can believe the expert is probably not the person who wrote the flashcards.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's a concern even outside OER as well.
I think we've seen, just as you as instructors have seen, the nature of instructional materials changing as things go increasing online. The library's definitely seen that. We've got more and more ebooks in our collection. Our reference collection is, pretty much transforming wholesale into digital resources eventually. We've got streaming media now. So I'd like to think there's a intersection for faculty in the library to sort of start. Maybe there's an efficient way for students and faculty to make better use of the materials that we already license for use, not just for research projects, not just for papers, but for your course reading materials. And I think we need to work that out, but it's an encouraging area, I think, because I think our interests sort of intersect there, and it's possible to get the most bang for our buck that way. So, any other questions?
Also, just a quick comment. As I've been trying to look at some of these resources, I find it must be very burdensome on the faculty to actually try to screen for accessibility in the products and in the sub-products of it as there's so many contributors. So I'm curious about whether you've heard of any of the consortiums like edX actually having accessibility as a searchable tag. This is certified accessible.
I don't know. Unfortunately, at our last session, we had somebody from the Disability Support Services office here, and I wish she'd been able to come this time. But I don't know offhand. But maybe that's a role that a support role they could play in this too. She definitely raised it as a concern that we all have to be aware of, because she knows that it too often gets overlooked from what she said. So.
Some website, I don't know if it's W3C compliant and 508 compliant. That's because I only know this because the OWL had to be because of accessibility and JAWS screen readers and everything. The bottom of some websites you can see the text 508 compliant, or I always get them W3C. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
it is, okay.
Very common.
Yeah, but that's I tend to look for that, but a lot of people don't know about it who are generating content. Think about, hey, you can run these through to make sure your material's compliant or not. But yeah, we don't talk a lot about accessibility. That's
We get a lot of that, especially in the world when you go into the access cards and know how they're actually not accessible. So we try and work with disability services, try to get some information, or at least a vendor or someone to help them with contact with them.
even just the websites you assign to. I always look for ones where you can make the typeface bigger, the text. Yeah. Sometimes you can change the color contrast, which is excellent. I mean, it's fantastic.
In general, we find that websites that naturally are friendly towards more mobile formats are also very close on accessibility. That's a great first screen, is just to shrink your screen down and see if the content's still readable.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there is a need for education for all of us on this. You've got the licensing issue. What is Creative Commons? How is it best used? You've got the whole definitional issues of what is an OER and what isn't, and then these accessibility issues. So I think it's hopefully having these kinds of conversations across different areas of the campus with faculty, librarians, and support staff participating in will help us move towards that. But anyway, if there are no other questions, I want to thank Patty and Liz both for sharing their experience with us today.